Welcome to the Real Crime Diary, Daily Dose of Crime. I'm Sean Dupree, and today we're diving into a chilling story that's been keeping me up at night. 4 men, 4 death sentences, all scheduled for November 2024. It's a grim reminder of the weight our justice system carries. You know, after spending 15 years behind bars myself, I've seen firsthand how thin the line between victim and monster can be. These cases we're about to explore? They're not just names and dates. They're complex stories of human nature gone wrong, of lives forever altered. As we unravel the details of these upcoming executions, I want you to consider the bigger picture. What does justice really look like? And at what cost do we pursue it? Buckle up, folks. This is going to be a heavy ride. Let's turn our attention to Richard Moore, a man whose fate hangs in the balance as South Carolina prepares to resume executions after a 13-year hiatus. Moore's case is a stark reminder of how a single moment can alter the course of multiple lives forever. Back in 1999, Moore walked into a convenience store, unarmed, intending to rob it. What happened next is a tragic sequence of events that left store clerk James Mahoney dead and Moore facing the ultimate punishment. During the botched robbery, a struggle ensued. Moore allegedly grabbed Mahoney's gun, and in the chaos that followed, both men were shot. Mahoney didn't survive. Now, here's where things get complicated. Moore's defenders argue that his actions lacked premeditation. They question whether this crime truly meets the threshold for capital punishment. But the justice system saw it differently. What's particularly troubling about Moore's case is the racial undertones. He was convicted by an all-white jury, raising concerns about systemic bias in our courts. It's a stark reminder of the complexities surrounding race and justice in America. As South Carolina gears up for Moore's execution, scheduled for November 1st, the state finds itself at a crossroads. This execution would mark only the second since they resumed capital punishment. The controversy surrounding Moore's case has reignited debates about the fairness and efficacy of the death penalty itself. Now, let's turn our attention to Thomas Creech, Idaho's longest-serving death row inmate. His case took a shocking turn in February 2024 when his execution was botched, sparking intense debate over the state's protocols. After 8 failed attempts to establish an IV line, the Idaho Department of Correction was forced to halt the procedure. I've seen firsthand how these moments can haunt everyone involved: the inmate, the staff, even the witnesses. It's a heavy weight that lingers long after the execution chamber doors close. Creech, convicted of multiple murders, has been on death row for over 4 decades. The failed attempt to end his life has reignited questions about the humanity and effectiveness of capital punishment. Idaho's response? They've updated their protocols to include central line access, a more invasive method using deeper veins in the neck or chest. But Creech's legal team argues this second attempt amounts to cruel and unusual punishment. The psychological toll of facing death once, only to be told you'll face it again, it's hard to fathom. I've known men who've lived with that uncertainty, and it changes them in ways that are difficult to describe. As Idaho pushes forward without an independent review, ethical concerns continue to mount. It leaves us questioning, at what point does justice become cruelty? Now, let's turn our attention to a case that's stirring up quite a debate in Alabama. Kerry Grayson is set to face execution on November 21st, but it's not just the execution itself that's raising eyebrows. It's the method they plan to use. Alabama wants to execute Grayson using nitrogen hypoxia. It's a method that's barely been tested and has never been used in Alabama before. Essentially, it involves replacing oxygen with nitrogen, causing death by suffocation. Sounds clinical, doesn't it? But the reality might be far from it. Grayson was just 19 when he was convicted of murder back in 1994. His case has always been controversial, especially since his younger accomplices had their sentences commuted. But now, decades later, he's facing this untried execution method. The ethical implications here are huge. We're talking about using an untested method on a human being. Recent evidence suggests that nitrogen hypoxia might cause significant distress before death. Is this not cruel and unusual punishment? It really makes you wonder, in our quest for justice, where do we draw the line? And who gets to make these decisions about how we end a human life? Now, let's shift our focus to Marion Bowman Jr., scheduled for execution on November 29th in South Carolina. Bowman's case brings up a crucial issue that's been bubbling under the surface of the death penalty debate: media access and transparency. Bowman was convicted of murdering Candy Martin back in 2001, shooting her during an argument over money and then attempting to cover up the crime by burning her body in a car. It's a horrific act, no doubt. But what's caught my attention is the battle over who gets to tell Bowman's story in his final days. The ACLU has been fighting tooth and nail to gain access for interviews with Bowman. They argue that the public has a right to hear from death row inmates, to understand their perspectives and experiences. But South Carolina has some of the strictest media restrictions in the country when it comes to death row. This isn't just about Bowman. It's about how we as a society approach justice and transparency. Do we have a right to know what goes on behind those prison walls? Or should the final days of a condemned person be shrouded in silence? These are questions that have haunted me since my own time inside. The answers aren't simple, but they're conversations we need to have. As we delve deeper into these 4 cases, it's impossible to ignore the glaring systemic issues that plague our capital punishment system. The racial bias is stark. Just look at Richard Moore's case in South Carolina. An all-white jury sealed his fate, a scenario that's all too common and raises serious questions about fairness in our courts. Then there's the matter of money. It's no coincidence that most death row inmates come from poor backgrounds. They simply can't afford the kind of high-powered legal defense that might save their lives. It's a brutal reminder that in our justice system, the scales often tip in favor of those with deeper pockets. But perhaps the most chilling aspect is the psychological toll of death row itself. Thomas Creech has been waiting for death for over 4 decades. Imagine the mental anguish of living each day knowing it could be your last. It's a form of torture that goes beyond the sentence itself. These cases force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our justice system. Are we really delivering justice, or are we perpetuating a cycle of inequality and cruelty? It's a question we can't afford to ignore. As we wrap up today's episode, we've delved into the stories of 4 men facing execution this November. From Richard Moore in South Carolina to Thomas Creech in Idaho, Kerry Grayson in Alabama, and Marion Bowman Jr. back in South Carolina, each case highlights the complexities and controversies surrounding capital punishment. These stories raise profound questions about justice, ethics, and the very nature of our legal system. I've seen firsthand how these issues can divide communities and challenge our notions of right and wrong. I invite you to continue this conversation. Share your thoughts on social media using #RealCrimeDiary. How do these cases make you feel? What do they reveal about our justice system? Your voice matters in this ongoing debate. Until next time, this is Sean Dupree, reminding you that behind every crime, there's a story waiting to be told.
Hey listeners, welcome back to the Real Crime Diary. I'm your host, Sean Dupree. If you tuned in last time, we had a deep dive into the disturbing history of power abuse across different eras, looking at the connection between dominance, control, and how it plays out even today. We touched on scandals from the past and compared them with some modern-day examples, showing how these patterns of abuse, unfortunately, persist. One of the most insightful tools we've explored to understand this is my book, Power, Pleasure, and Pain, a study of abuse through time. It's not just a historical account, but an interdisciplinary approach to understanding why this keeps happening. We draw from history, philosophy, and modern case studies to explain how figures like Dominique Pellico, Harvey Weinstein, and others have exploited their positions of power for their own gain, often protected by the very systems meant to stop them. Recap of last interaction. In our last live stream, we discussed how libertinism, philosophically introduced by figures like Marquis de Sade, has shaped the way power and pleasure have been entangled throughout history. This concept ties directly into how figures like Weinstein operated, as we saw parallels between de Sade's fictional characters and the way powerful men manipulated their victims in real life. You guys had some amazing comments, asking how societal structures have allowed these behaviors to go unchecked for so long. It's a crucial question, and one that the book addresses deeply. Why this book is valuable. Now, what's powerful about Power, Pleasure, and Pain is its ability to break down these historical patterns and link them to the present. You're not just reading about ancient Rome or Enlightenment philosophy. You're seeing how these ideologies are alive today, The book uncovers how sexual violence and control have been systematically woven into the fabric of societies from ancient times right up to the modern era. It's about understanding not just the individual predators, but the systems that protect them, whether it's in royal courts, religious institutions, or today's corporate and entertainment worlds. Through these historical lenses, we also explore movements like #MeToo that are beginning to dismantle these structures. The fight for justice is far from over, but as the book demonstrates, we are in the midst of a cultural shift where legal reforms are finally addressing these long-standing issues. It's more than a history lesson. It's a guide to understanding and supporting change today. What's next? If you want to dive deeper, I suggest picking up Power, Pleasure, and Pain, a study of abuse through time. It's available now, and trust me, it will change the way you think about power, pleasure, and control. We've even got some exclusive content coming up on the channel where we'll be exploring the book's case studies in even more detail, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to The Real Crime Diary so you don't miss any updates. Let's keep this conversation going, because understanding the past is key to changing the future.